The purpose of Khafre's drainage channel was to prevent his causeway from flooding by draining off rainwater into the area where the Sphinx sits today. Lacavara believes this is evidence the Sphinx didn't exist before Khafre.
Clearly, it doesn't make sense that if this had already existed, if the Sphinx had been built, say, by Khufu, they wouldn't be flooding this area with water. There would be no reason to be pouring water into this great monument. So it seems clear that that is evidence that this Sphinx was made by Khafre and late in his reign.
If Lacavara is right, then when Khafre came to the throne, this area was nothing more than a pit used for collecting excess rainwater. The Sphinx hadn't yet been carved from the stone. But Lacavara is frustrated by the lack of hard evidence.
We know very little as far as written record goes. In such a remote period, there are no records. Nothing survives. There's no inscriptions, nothing specifically to point to when it was made and who made it.
Unlike the pyramids, the Sphinx wasn't built out of blocks hauled to the location. It was carved right out of the bedrock in a single piece. So Lacavara is going right back to the beginning. If the Sphinx started out as a lump of rock in a quarry, he wants to explore step by step just how it was created. And at another site close to the Sphinx, he finds a clue frozen into the stone.
The area around the Sphinx would have originally looked something like this. It's great because you can kind of see it's a moment frozen in time. So you can see how they actually worked here. You can imagine hundreds and hundreds of workmen just lined up here, pounding away at this stone, just in lines, one after the other. Really a machine, smashing these blocks, smashing these channels out of the rock, creating these channels in order to free them from the bedrock and then move them off to go build the pyramids and the temples here at Giza.
So whoever it was that built the Sphinx started by removing thousands of tons of rock from the desert floor in the form of huge multi-ton blocks. The lump of rock left behind was then carved into the shape of the Sphinx. But the most important evidence is hidden underneath the surface. It's in the composition of the rock itself.
If you look, the limestone is layered like a layer cake. And some layers were softer than others, depending on what was in them. And so they've eroded more than the layers above and below them. And this kind of very distinctive patterning that we see here, we also can see in the walls of the quarry over there.
Lacavara has identified a telltale pattern in the limestone. Millions of years ago, the Giza Plateau was under the sea. On the sea floor, the compressed remains of billions of marine creatures, layer upon layer, gradually formed into the rock we see today. Depending on their precise composition, some layers are harder and more durable than others. And that leaves a unique pattern of weathering running through the rock of the Sphinx today. Lacavara decides to search for that same pattern. When he goes to the temple built by Khafre in front of the Sphinx, he sees exactly the same sequence of soft and hard rock. The grooves in the walls of the temple and the grooves on the Sphinx match.
You can see here where we have this differential pattern of wear. Here's this soft layer here that runs right across this block and the neighboring block. So because of the wear pattern and the fossils, they're all sort of like fingerprints. They all tell us exactly where they came from. And so we can match them all up with the rock on the Sphinx's body itself.
The unique pattern running through the stone proves that the rock that once surrounded the Sphinx's body was taken to make Khafre's temples. So the Sphinx itself must have been carved after Khafre's temples. There was no Sphinx before that time.
I think there's no doubt that Khafre built the Great Sphinx. I think all the evidence points in that direction. any of the other evidence is just full of holes. It's the logical choice. It's the one that makes, the only one that makes real sense.
If Lacavara's theory is correct, there is no room for doubt. It was Khafre who built the Sphinx, not his father, Khufu, or his brother, Jedefre. Lacavara's findings also rule out Colin Reeder's theory that the Sphinx began as a lion, carved much earlier than Khafre's time. So the face on the Sphinx has a name. This is Khafre. One question remains. Can the team discover why he built this monster?